Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Next Mountain podcast, where we explore transitions, finding your purpose, and creating meaningful impact. Today, we're joined by the remarkable Natasha Freidus, a serial social entrepreneur, co-founder of Equity Cute, and an innovator that has reimagined what business can look like when it's genuinely built for good. So Tasha has spent over 2 decades at the intersection of human-centered design, technology, and social impact. She's the kind of person who sees a crisis unfolding and asks, how do we build a better system? And that's exactly what happened when she was living in France in 2015, watching refugees arrive with nowhere to turn, and turn a wedding registry into the proof of concept for Needslist, a tech platform that went on to match millions of dollars in aid during some of the world's most urgent humanitarian crises, before being acquired in 2023. So in this conversation, we'll dive into her journey from her first company to this accidental startup to the acquisition, and into what comes after, and how she's thinking about new models of ownership, systems change, and what it means to keep climbing once you've already reached one summit. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as much as we did. And if you do, please like and share the podcast so we can continue bringing you these inspiring stories. And so now let's get started. So hi, Tasha. Welcome to Next Mountain Podcast.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy. So to start, how would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Let's see. People usually call me Tasha Freidus, and I'm calling in from Toronto. I moved here in 2018. Had previously moved around quite a bit. I grew up in the States, lived in Europe for several years, and am now proud to call Canada my home. And I have been running different forms of what I now call social enterprise, but at the time I used to call for little profit when I got started for the past 25 years.
And the mom. And
I have 2 teens, yes, and I live with my daughter is now near you at school in Montreal, and my son is still at home, and my husband and I are here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tasha. And so would you tell us a bit more about that, what we call first mountain? So what was and you had many, but maybe the ones that were important that were important in your life. I mean, I'm sure they were all important, but like, which one would you like to tell us more about, and which one was more transformational? And we know you lived an exit, so maybe sharing a bit about that.
Yeah, my first company I would call a hill. So I started off running a consulting and training company focused on multimedia storytelling. Worked with a whole range of organizations right when new types of software was becoming embedded on personal computers and nobody knew how to use it. So I was working with organizations to help them tell their story more effectively. And I did that for about 15 years before selling the business to my because I was climbing a mountain at that point, and that was a new company, which I really had no idea how large a mountain it was because I didn't know what I was getting into. So I called myself an accidental founder in that respect. I was living in Europe during around 2014, 2015, when there were many, many refugees arriving from Syria, Afghanistan, and other places. And there was this whole rise of mutual aid, people on the ground who wanted to help. And what I found is that people really wanted to help and they didn't know how. So I was organizing a local volunteer group where I lived in Southwest France, and the needs were changing every day. We were posting on Facebook. We were communicating by email, and I had no way to update needs in real time. And I thought, isn't there some kind of registry, like plugin on WordPress? I started looking around because I had been working in tech for a while and I couldn't find anything. So I actually used a wedding registry, and that was later, I didn't even know, but that was like the first proof of concept for this idea that morphed into a company called Needslist, which evolved to be a software company matching needs and offers in times of crisis, and really around building local resiliency and a much more efficient tech-enabled form of support.
So do you want to tell us more about the journey of building Needslist? What happened after the proof of concept? How did that traction, all of this stuff?
Yeah, I like to say it was like a PhD in running a startup. And I really am so glad I did have the opportunity to exit because I saw the whole trajectory over 7 or 8 years. And so what was really different about this company than my previous company is that I was going to have to raise capital. I knew that from the beginning. So while I had operated in the tech space, I wasn't a software developer or engineer. And I knew that we were going to have to hire talent and that was expensive. So the journey of raising capital and being introduced to the world of VC and then, subsequently impact investing was a tremendous one for me. Previously, I really just needed to pay myself and figure out what my own salary would be and any other costs that were really, our overhead was quite minimal. And all of a sudden I was learning how to do 5-year projections and learned what a hockey stick was and all of that. Literally I thought pitching was something you did on the baseball field. So I really got a crash course in learning by doing, and I was super fortunate to have some incredible mentors along the way, and a friend of a friend who came on as one of our first investors who she taught me and my co-founder like everything really especially around the financial side. So, we went through a couple different accelerator programs, got some initial startup capital, kept kind of getting to the point where we could build out the next version of the platform. And long story short, eventually closed a seed round and built up a team primarily based here in Toronto. It was in 2018 when I moved here. And over the following several years, we were coming in at a time where, as you know, over the last decade, it's been crisis after crisis. So while we first got started with this very specific focus on displacement, what happened was that the types of displacement grew and expanded to climate. We were finding that our users were saying, can we use this for wildfires or hurricanes? And very quickly adapted the platform so it could be focused much more on natural disaster as well. And so, I think in some ways we were at the right place at the right time. We were, started partnering with USAID, deployed the platform for Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas in 2019. And then it was 2020, I think, when we had a real turning point, which was the fall of Kabul and when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. And all of a sudden, there were thousands and thousands of Afghans being brought into the US. Most of them were being held on military bases. And this was a point at which there were thousands of people, but also companies that wanted to help. This was a very politically neutral time. And so there was cross-party engagement. The Department of State basically funded a whole initiative that was designed to support arrival. And so our platform ended up being used to match needs from different resettlement agencies, and the military, actually, Homeland Security, was helping welcome people at that time with offers from mattress companies and cell phone companies and what have you. So, very quickly we had millions and millions of dollars of products and services being matched through the platform.
Wow.
And Tasha, how is it that you chose to do this? Like you kind of quickly went, I did this, and then, but like, what I think, was it like something that you had? Was it some kind of mission? It was like, it's a huge project, right?
Well, since my 20s, I had done master's in community development and urban policy at MIT. And when I got there, I was not drawn to the program because of its technology focus, but it's immersed throughout the curriculum and the university there. And I quickly saw the way that new media and new technology could be used to support the kind of development work I was interested in. So I think I was aware of that and had been kind of on the periphery of this kind of technology for social good movement before it was really called that. And so I think what happened was, as I was volunteering, I kind of was going crazy, running around like getting somebody a coat and finding diapers and what have you. And I had a moment where I thought, is there a better way I could use my skill set? And I was kind of part of this community of tech volunteers. And so that's where, I was getting some traction just locally. I wasn't trying to get traction. It's just what happened because I didn't know what traction meant, actually. And then, more and more people were saying this has a viable business model. I think we should incorporate it and we should do it as a for-profit, impact-driven company, which I have to say, like, I struggled with a little bit just because there's this, you're talking about the aid space, right? And the idea of being a for-profit felt somewhat uncomfortable to me. And at the same time, it was very clear to me as I dug into the space that the needs had vastly outpaced demand. It was only going to keep doing so. The sector, was dominated by not-for-profits, and it wasn't working. And at the same time, the for-profits certainly come in and make a whole ton of money every time there's a crisis, right? There's crazy price gouging. There's no guardrails. And so part of it was just intellectual. Like, I was really interested. Is there a different model for this? Is there a way that a for-profit company can build in mission and embed it in the DNA of its company so it can have impact and be more efficient and have access to the kind of investment funds that an NGO would never have access to? Because when you create your hockey stick, we could show a pathway to that kind of return. Now, I'll be the first to say that kind of financial return, I think, is extremely challenging and unrealistic. And I feel like I was taught a lot of stuff that didn't make sense at some of these accelerators because you're taught for the unicorn model, as opposed to kind of a sustainable business that is certainly bringing in profits, but not necessarily going to bring in 100x, 1,000x returns.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And looking back at that, it sounds like you were doing a lot of equilibrium, like trying to balance out, right? Impact, profit, the best of all the worlds you knew, basically, and innovating as you went. And looking back now, what would you criticize, comment? Like, how do you look at it now?
I teach now social entrepreneurship in different ways. I've been teaching at University of Toronto. I teach a course on social entrepreneurship as a way to tackle the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I've been teaching on a local level. So what I've really tried to do is adapt the kind of curriculum I was taught or the model I was taught. And I'm certainly not the only one. I'm drawing on other people's resources to kind of challenge that dominant paradigm. And I want people to understand it, because it's really important that when you go in front of an investor, that you can speak their language and understand what they're looking for, but also couch it in, what kind of financial return are you looking for? Are there models that will keep your impact moving forward and advancing it? What kind of balance is there going to be between profit and purpose? Really, like, putting those questions central so people can play with different models and experiment and think about how to build companies that represent a different way of doing business. And for me, that's the fundamental. It's not about making investors who already have a lot of money more money. It's really about making sure that you have a business model that continues to do good and generate wealth for multiple types of ownership.
Yeah, it's interesting because in our conversation with the investing world as well, and my own experience, I try to raise some capital as well for an impact-driven venture. You really see that you have to educate yourself about the types of funds, because the GPs are, in a way, they're accountable to the LPs. So so when you meet the investor, you think, oh, that person has the power to, fund my company. A lot of them, if the LPs, the structure of the fund doesn't support that, or a lot of them treat impact as kind of like a nice to have, or more like a branding asset more than a core wealth. So what's been your experience with that? I'm curious.
Well, my experience actually was, for the most part, impact investors made you go through 10 times as much due diligence for a tenth of the money. And I've heard that over and over again. So we actually ended up really, there was a range in terms of our investors, but most of them were not necessarily impact investors per se, right? They were people that believed in us and our model. And,
So
we
you
were also.
translated basically to their language, like you were saying, and
Yeah, exactly. But I'm very cautious now when I talk to people who are early stage and looking to raise investment from, I'm almost like, don't even lead with your impact. Don't talk about with your impact. You make that part of the governance and ownership of your company and your product or service. But if you're trying to raise capital, I would really not limit yourself to looking to people who are necessarily values aligned, because there are ways to meet values aligned people that don't necessarily identify as impact investors too. And I think overall, I'm really encouraging people to just focus on revenue or frankly, non-dilutive grant funding that's out there, because I think it's a huge time suck and it's just not necessarily, I don't think the checks are out there. I know Canada especially gets a tough time about this. I think the situation is a bit better in Quebec. I would say that. But it's so hard. Then it's going to be a lot easier, frankly, to raise investment if you already have revenue anyway.
Yeah,
So
For
kind of a
sure.
win-win.
Yeah.
yeah.
I wonder if a lot of the entrepreneurs we speak to, so they exit a more traditional, let's say, business, right? Some of them actually say, I started the business because I wanted to help X problem, but in growing I had to pivot. And often they sacrifice the why and what their heart wanted to do initially. Anyway, and so sometimes they have that regret. Sometimes they just don't know necessarily what to do. They know how to build a business, but they don't dare listen to the things that they really care about. Like, let's say we talk about their business for half an hour, and they're like, kind of like the energy is okay. And then you ask, but I don't know, what did you dream to do when you were a kid? Or what problems of the world bother you right now? And then they get super excited and they start talking about education and, like, helping children and stuff like that. But it's like a different drawer in their brain. And it's almost like it's like, but how, like, I can't make money with this, or, it's like for them, it's like very separate. So I wonder what kind of lenses do you wear that you are able to mix those drawers? What would you recommend? How would you tell them to switch their perspective?
Well, I probably wouldn't tell them to switch their perspective because that would be
Okay.
challenging. But, I come from two sides of generations of entrepreneurs. So I was definitely raised with that spirit of entrepreneurship. I have never done so well with being told what to do. Being my own boss was always quite appealing. And then on the other side, I also was raised with really strong values around education, became quite aware of inequities in the world, as a teenager. So was very concerned about issues of social justice and equity. So for me, it's been a natural kind of marriage to bring those two sides of myself together. I think there's also a couple things like never made sense to me. I'm from the States where instead of charity, I know we have this here in Canada as well too, but you have for profit and nonprofit. And for me, if I was going to put my heart and soul into work, why would I want to say I don't want to profit from this? Like, there's something inherently that never
Mm,
made sense to me. And it's changed a bit now, but at that time, again, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was really gendered. And what I found is men had a problem they wanted to solve and they would start businesses, and women had a problem they wanted to solve and they would start not for profits. So it wasn't necessarily about me individually becoming rich. It was more just about having a business mindset. And what I think businesses do is when you have revenue, again, you have control over the decisions you make as opposed to relying on outside investors or grants that really constrain your ability to pivot or make decisions outside of whatever the scope of what you said you would do. So I think maybe a lot of it comes down to being a control freak and needing to be able to make my own decisions. And when you earn your own money, you can make your own decisions. That's what I
yeah.
tell teenagers too.
Well, but also you are looking for ways to make money in areas where people would say, no, that's a not-for-profit area, right? It's like you don't like those barriers, and so you don't see them either in the business model, but also in life.
Yep, that's right. I think I've kind of operated in those spaces in between.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's interesting is, like, what's coming up a lot in our conversation is that the people who have, like, something at heart, it's like in a for-profit model, is like, it's the money is not it's not the goal. Making money is not the goal, it's the means to do the thing, you know? So
Mhm.
pivoting back to the story, because I want to know what happened with Needslist. So you were growing it here in Canada, and it got used in all of these different crisis situations. So then what happened?
Then Putin invaded Ukraine, which
Right.
led to, I mean, really, like the story of Needslist jumps was inextricably linked to like crisis and history over the last decade. But Google basically announced, was looking for partners to support needs on the ground in Ukraine. And we ended up getting a $1 million grant from them, which was also tremendous. And around that same time, I was increasingly trying to figure out how we were going to scale this. So we spent a lot of time looking at the financials and what paths we could take. And it became pretty clear to me that either we were going to have to raise a Series A round or we could sell and become part of something bigger. And I had been increasingly frustrated at the kind of gap between the rhetoric around investing in underrepresented founders and the reality.
The action.
So I'm sure you all are nodding, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, look, I'm like white. I have 2 passports. I went to an Ivy League university, and it's still almost impossible for me to raise money for this impact business. So if I can't do it, like I'm kind of the easiest type of, most privileged of this large set of underrepresented founders, there's some real bullshit happening. And so I found that I was increasingly drawn to looking at that space around access to capital and financing than working on Needslist. And you really can't do both at the same time, right? I actually share some articles in my social entrepreneurship course that say founders need to be working on systems change and their own businesses at the same time. But like, I was like, I got kids and I can't do all 3 of these things, you know? So, and my co-founder and I were pretty aligned on this. So we decided that the path forward was for us to look into acquisition opportunities. So the impetus came from us, and we really just started this process of speaking to all our partners and different potential partners and other folks in the space and saying, would you be interested in, purchasing this company? And part of it was also looking at who might be better positioned to scale it faster. So usually startups are taught not to sell early on because you won't make as much money. It's not necessarily because you won't scale it quickly, right? You're taught to wait until the valuation goes way up so you can, as a founder, make as much as possible for yourself and your investors. They're drilling next door. Sorry, can you guys hear that?
It's just barely.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't bother.
Okay, great. So long story short, we talked to a whole bunch of folks. We had some interest. It went up and down. We had one almost incredible opportunity that literally got foiled by another crisis in the world because the potential acquirer had to negotiate hostage release. So lots of drama, as often happens in an exit. And one of the companies we had been talking to was a company called Armillaria that was looking to build a larger suite of tools around technology for social impact. And the idea there being like, Microsoft Office or what have you, like, so our tool would be on the back end interoperable with other systems that were also looking around supporting public technology. And so that was a really appealing fit for us. The founders and the leadership of that company were values aligned, and we made the sale happen within a few months of deciding. So that was fantastic. So that, I think it was at midnight on December 31st, 2024. I got to have a nice glass of champagne and celebrate.
Well, I did see your comment on one of my posts where I talked about all of the things I did post my exit, like walking the Camino and traveling the world and doing this thing. So, maybe you could tell us. So after that glass of champagne, what happened?
I think I probably watched too much Netflix for a month or 2. It was and I was, I was definitely in recuperation mode for a little bit and really just, but most of all, I was trying to hold that tension between not feeling too much pressure to figure it out, what I was going to do next right away. And also, I'm someone that gets bored by not having purpose in my day. One thing that happened, I think, like I just started talking to a lot of people and just really exploring what could come next. I took on some small consulting gigs. I started teaching, and that was a really fantastic opportunity because when you teach, it forces you to kind of learn the theory. And so I was learning all this theory of what I was like, oh, I did that and I did that and I didn't even know I was supposed to do that. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. Or, so it really gave me a framework and an ability to position Needslist in a larger wave of social entrepreneurship, which was really useful for me. Plus, it was really fun to coach emerging social entrepreneurs. And I found that I really enjoyed doing that. I got a small gig as an entrepreneur in residence at University of Toronto as well, where I do coach student and other entrepreneurs. I really enjoy that. But I was just sitting there open, wondering what would come next and keeping an eye out for things. And that's when I saw it on LinkedIn, an announcement that SureFast was looking for someone to help them launch this next phase of their work, which was taking SureFast is a Canadian charity that owns a suite of businesses on Fogo Island, Newfoundland. And you might have heard of the Fogo Island Inn, which is probably the most well-known of these. And they were looking at someone to help them take some of this learning and build a national network and institute that was to support new models of place-based economic development. And I was really intrigued, because this is, in some ways, it was like extremely aligned with the types of businesses I'd been interested in building, and yet very different because it was hyper local, right? And so when you're working in tech, like place is meaningless. So I had also been in Canada at that point for about 5 years. And since half of it had been COVID, I just wasn't feeling enough connection to my city and to the country. And so I was looking to do something that would connect me more in the local ecosystem. So it seemed like a really good fit. And and I've been working with SureFast ever since.
And what should people know about SureFast if they don't know it?
If they don't know SureFast, they should take a look at the website. What will happen is two things. One is you're going to want to jump on a plane and get yourself over there. Fly. And really, the natural beauty of the place is absolutely just mind blowing and tremendous. And then the other thing they'll pick up very quickly is that the attention to place is different, and the way SureFast talks about places is just so different than the way I've seen anybody think about it. And so it's really shifted my own thinking about, instead of thinking just about how businesses can have impact, which is more broadly, the way SureFast talks about places that, there's no impact that doesn't happen in a place, in a physical place. So it's not enough to just think about impact happening out there in the air. How do you build businesses that support their local places? And I've found that language just really fascinating and important, and frankly, much less divisive than this kind of rhetoric around social impact. I think we all live in places, and in a time when our world is so divided politically, it's something that brings people together is caring for the places they live. And so I'm quite interested in really thinking more about this, is how do we build businesses that support our local communities, that create new models of economic development, that allow us to position our businesses in the context of a local economy. And it's been a real mind shift for me.
We actually have a few of the entrepreneurs we've helped in our workshops and interviews. They are often interested in helping their community. It's like they don't have this huge dream of like, I want to fix, I don't know, poverty.
Climate
That's not
change or
exactly. It's not, but they do want to help a specific community where they grew up, or and so I wonder what advice would you tell them, and like how to go about it, how to research, or even like, is it something they can do in contact with SureFast, because they're mostly in Canada.
Yeah, they can definitely reach out to us. I mean, this is part of the broader work that we're developing around building capacity for economic stewardship. Part of that is building businesses that invest in their places. And so we're thinking about it in terms of a number of different principles. So I think the most common way that a business will think about how to give back to their community is to donate pizza to the local, primary school. That's like the default, right? Is
Right.
here's some pizza for your family fun day. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, what else can we do? Both might be familiar with SureFast's economic nutrition model, which really takes the traditional nutrition label that we see on all our food and instead demonstrates your procurement and expenditures. So you look at that label, and maybe you can show a graphic on the show, and you can see where does the money go, both geographically and then in terms of line item or category. And so that gives a very tangible way for businesses to think about supporting their communities. So really, I'm always encouraging businesses, not just individuals, but business to think about local procurement.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
even
one.
like in the case of these entrepreneurs, they don't have a business anymore. They've exited, and they're like, okay, this community, I want to support it, but like, where do I start? And they have ideas. They're like, oh, I can buy the church and transform it into an ice cream place. I don't know, I'm making this stuff up, but it is like they want to develop the place, but like it's complex, right? So how do you go about that? How do you start?
We've taken John McKnight's model of ABCD, which is asset based community development, which really looks at what you have in your community and how to grow on that. And we've added this E to it for the economy. So part of what we're doing is encouraging people as a way to start is look at what assets they have in their community. Don't do it by yourself, right? Do it with other people. Bring your community together, set some type of table for multiple actors to sit together and really look at these assets together. And then think about what businesses can help enrich these assets and invest in these assets and grow businesses that will create wealth that can be reinvested in that community. So it might be about revitalizing a church and starting an ice cream store, but I think what is useful is to really make sure that there's some type of process behind it. And just like any business, there has to be a real rigor around viability and market realities too.
Yes, of course.
One of the things I found really interesting, Natalia did was part of a study that Dark Matter Labs did on
We
Fogo,
work
and
together on that. Yeah.
you guys were connected on that, and just witnessing or experiencing it, I found really interesting was that it was created through a process of emergence, which is really the opposite of the kind of like engineer entrepreneur mindset which come from the top. Is it what's the problem here, what are the systems I can create to affect the system from the top down. And I connected I found it really interesting, even your needs list, assessing needs and allow that to come up is kind of the same process in a way. It's rather than say let's engineer or want and try to respond that in a market way. It's more like what are the needs that are existing already, and what are the resources that, and also like I found it was really interesting also watching the CBC documentary that was made about Zita Cobb, where she talks about the process of connecting the different communities on the island, and spending a lot of time and effort in terms of allowing those stories to come up. So how do you, is there like what kind of initiatives that you guys are doing or processes in Shorefast around that?
Well, we've been leading these workshop series for different communities. Brought together 8 communities last year for a combination of online and in-person immersion and place-based economic development. So all of that is about learning from each other, active listening, collective problem solving around larger issues of economic stewardship. So there's that piece of the work. And then I told you at the beginning, I wear multiple hats. So in my other hat, I've been running a consulting and fractional executive company with a woman named Sarah Wolf. It's called Equity Cubed. And we just taught a community business entrepreneurship course here in Toronto in the Parkdale neighborhood that was focused on looking at low income entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship as a means out of poverty. So it's part of a larger initiative out of the University of Notre Dame, actually, called Urban Poverty and Business Initiative. And teaching with Sarah was really fantastic because Sarah brings an Indigenous lens to her entrepreneurship. So part of our focus was always what she calls the original AI ancestral insights, really like drawing on history and drawing on the resources of the land, but also building in community and building businesses that are accountable and in relationship with your community. And so I think that, those ancestral insights coupled with the learnings from Shorefast and Zita's approach to place have been really useful for me to think about these new models of businesses because, we do need to build businesses that support one another, and local procurement systems are a very tangible way of doing that. But in the kind of Silicon Valley model, we're taught to compete against everybody, right? And I think there's room out there for us to be cooperating in partnerships. And certainly any business I've ever gotten off the ground only did so through partnerships. That's what makes us bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and able to do more. I'm hearing so many from what you're saying, so many things, but one thing I'm keeping top of mind for our listeners is like when they're looking for their next thing, don't focus on the first idea and don't hope to have the idea. Like take the time, play around, go observe, learn, ask questions, make partnerships, and then let the solution emerge, right? And don't hold it by yourself in your head. It's like because the usual entrepreneur energy is a little bit action oriented and really quick, but here it's like there's a need for time, and exit entrepreneurs have time. It's just sometimes they're uncomfortable with taking the time. So first advice is like take the time. That's what I'm hearing.
Take the time. And also, if you are interested in building a business that is double bottom line, triple bottom line, an alternative kind of business, absolutely talk to people who have done it before. Those who have succeeded and those who have failed and those who are in the midst of it. And I think people reach out to me all the time and they want to talk. And, I make as much time as I can. But I think overall, people are really willing to talk about it. One thing I've seen with exited entrepreneurs, who want to do something good is they really don't really look at what else is out there and what has failed. And I think when it comes to impact businesses, there are so many that have gone, it's really, really challenging. So the rate of failures, I'm sure, I don't have statistics on this, but if it's 95% of any startup fails within 5 years, for impact entrepreneurs, I'm sure it's more like 99%. So, I think there's a lot of knowledge and actual assets that are out there. People have built tech platforms that are sitting on GitHub. Look at one of those and talk to the person who started it rather than just starting from scratch. So people tend to want to start from scratch and do their own thing. But maybe it's about like finding someone coming on as like a fractional CTO or a fractional business development support, or helping someone out there raise money for um, their company rather than doing your own.
Yeah. One of the things we're seeing as well, and I've seen that a lot as well. I also coach in an impact accelerator. And what happens sometimes, especially people who contextually were the right people at the right time, were able to succeed in a certain context, that they arrive in the impact context or even philanthropy a bit like bulls in china shops, honestly, because they arrive in a non-for-profit or impact and they think they're going to come in and kind of move everything, and things are not moving in the same pace, or the culture is different. And that's part of the mission we want to do with Next Mountain as well, is to kind of create a bridge between those worlds. And one of the things I think is not spoken about too much is it's not just the skills or the knowledge, but also a way of being that needs to shift. And so for yourself, having seen both of these worlds, what do you think is needed in between to help that transition?
More government regulation
Mm,
and incentives and moving away incentives. I mean, frankly, I actually think we put too much of it on the individual, but
mm,
if we want to see businesses that are supporting our communities, we need to regulate some of that. So
Mhm.
I don't think we need to give huge tax breaks to companies like Amazon that are going to come in and be extractive, frankly. And that's public money. It should be going in to support public benefit. So full stop there. Otherwise, I think just an openness to learning new models of education in our business schools for sure. And I think a lot of our accelerators could frankly do a better job of some of this.
I agree.
One thing I'm really interested in is exploring alternative ownership structures, and this is something we're looking into at Equity Cubed. Fundamentally, if you have a business that is designed to make wealthy people richer, there's an issue there. So I think looking at business models that are not necessarily 100% owned by a charity, but can also serve as a way to redistribute wealth. I think that's really
Or employee owned, or
absolutely co-ops, employee ownership, steward ownership. Maybe it's about being governed by a nonprofit, but owned by the community that's affected by the problem. So there's a
yeah.
lot of new models out there, and I think that's something super interesting to invest in.
Yeah,
And then
and I just want to, before you continue, because you said it really quickly, but I've been studying also this for many years, and like, to reemphasize, like fine if your language with your investor is, and you have to adapt, right? Because that's the goal, you're aligning interests, but your governance should be thought in a different way, right? Ownership and governance should be um, designed in a way that avoids that. You can pivot because that's the goal. You should not pivot and go away from your impact, right? It's always like finding that balance, but that's what's difficult, I guess. And if we've interviewed people that were, they had to exit because the board decided, because they were too much of an activist, or the double bottom line was not an interest of their investor, it was theirs, and it was actually part of the value he was bringing in, generating a lot of growth. I'm thinking of Jeffrey Hollander here that we interviewed for 7th Generation. Eventually he was kicked out because they didn't understand really truly what he was going on, right? So there was not that alignment with the board. So anyway, just wanted to reemphasize that, because anyone that hasn't been in contact with can seem like something like, we'll look at governance after, but like, no.
Yeah. And I think what happens is all the accelerator programs that are committed to supporting impact, they take companies that are already formed. So they already have their bylaws and their corporate structure. And like, who has time to change that afterwards, right? And actually, nobody is teaching this anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you really need to do is get people thinking about it before they incorporate. And it's quite hard. And the only people, if you're going to do it through something like the Canadian, sorry, let me just start over. I think it's really challenging because there's very few people who know about alternative ownership structures or can help you think about it. And so the legal fees are quite prohibitive for folks that are starting out.
Yes, true.
And so if you're using something like RBC's owner platform or doing it directly on, through the CRA, there's nothing to help you. There's very few resources out there. So part of what we need to do is create better resources to make it very easy, templates and corporate bylaws that you can start with, and suggestions for alternative ownership structures. So that's something that Sarah and I are starting to experiment with this summer, is building a studio that would help spin out these types of businesses as well.
Well, even in Canada, I've seen, I think it was in last year, that there was a new fiscal policy where you can sell to an employee-owned structure that allows people to have the first, I think, 10 million tax-free or something like that if you sell to, and it's not well known at all. Like, people don't know about
Yeah.
this.
And so I think employee ownership trusts are amazing. And that's been
Yeah.
really critical legislation. But that's not actually at the startup stage, right? So you
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
have, like, it only makes sense if you have something like 50 employees, I
Right.
believe. So it's later on. And
Yeah.
that's fantastic, though. And I want to see more of that happening as well.
Definitely.
And I cut you off. I don't know if you want to go back to, or if that thought is gone.
It's actually still here, amazingly. But one other thing I was going to say for people who are exiting, and they're trying to figure out what to do next, I actually don't think people place enough value on their connections, because opening up doors, making connections for early stage entrepreneurs is actually probably the most impactful thing that you can do. People really want to like give people their advice, but oftentimes they just need an introduction to a potential customer, to a potential funder, to a potential partner. And so that's something I try to do as much as possible. And, having had people who opened up their doors to me was just really make or break for me as an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I had a question for you in terms of like your current projects. If exit entrepreneurs wanna start, diving into and supporting or helping, coaching, whatever, how can they reach you? How can they support you really? What means? And they could be human capital, real capital, whatever. Like any way. Like what could they do? Yeah.
Well, if they're interested in our work at Shorefast, they can go to the Shorefast Institute. It's just institute.shorefast.org. If they are interested, if they're in Toronto and they want to talk, I'm happy to connect. I do know many early stage entrepreneurs that are looking for additional mentorship. So I'm happy to introduce folks to them, and they can find me on LinkedIn and connect.
Yeah,
Great.
great. So maybe as a closing note, I like to ask people, like, what makes you hopeful? What are you seeing right now that's really inspiring for the future, for a positive future, for a regenerative future, for what is uplifting to you right now?
I think it's one of the most uplifting things and advantages I have is that I have young people in my life.
Mm.
So both my own kids and the young people that I work with, the kids aren't going to take it anymore. They're definitely looking for new models and a new world. And so they're building it, and it might not always be as quick as everyone would like, but absolutely. The young people I work with and the kids that come into my house and are part of my house, they bring me hopes.
Beautiful.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Tasha. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. Any last words, anything we haven't covered that you'd like to share with our audience?
No, just thank you so much for having me, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're getting going, so we hope this is a platform for collaboration and for, more storytelling and more connections. So thank you for being part of it at this early stage.
Yeah, and we'll be in touch. There's so much we can do. So we'll be in touch, Tasha.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
Have a good
Thank
end
you
of your
so
day.
much.
Ciao, ciao.